right, welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a great lunch break. We are beginning my session here 1:30 Eastern. You should be able to see my slides here. I've got quite a bit of information to cover here, so let's get started. As always, I love to know who is tuning in. I'm hosting myself here, so I'm not going to be doing much of an introduction. But I love to know who's tuning in, where you're from, city, state, country, province. If you've ever attended a FAI event in the past, if you're a functional aging specialist, if we've met in person, put any of that stuff in the chat. I'm not going to be checking the chat as much since I'm moderating my own session. So feel free to make comments, but I'm going to save plenty of time for Q&A at the end. So we officially go to 2:45. My goal is to be done at 2:30. I might even be done sooner. I do have a ton of slides, and I'm happy to make this handout available as well. So I know some people ask that. I've got a lot of information. Some of it I'm going to go through fairly quickly because it's overview. Some of it you've heard from me before. I want to really get to the scientific model of functional aging training. Dina is in here. Oh boy, look out. Dina, you've probably heard all this stuff before, but that's cool. Munaza, I'm not sure if I'm butchering your name, from Pakistan, welcome. Eunice Wildfire, you took the functional aging specialist first ever workshop, I think, in 2014, back in maybe San Diego or Orange County. Nancy from Point Richmond, California. Gotta make sure I don't scroll through my slides while I'm scrolling through the chat. Melbourne, Florida. Okay, so not Melbourne, Australia. Lacey, welcome. Anita, Pamela. All right. Anita, it's your first summit with FAI. Awesome, welcome. Gino, tuning in from Miami. You're a student. Fantastic. A student in physical therapy or fitness? I'd love to know. Dina, yours was in San Diego, but Eunice Wildfire, who I will never forget. Eunice, I'd love to know how old you are now, because I for some reason I was thinking you were 75 when you took the functional aging specialist. That was at Fitness Business Summit, I do believe, and I think it was Orange County, California. So that was even before you, Dina. Physical therapy student, awesome. All right, well, let's get rolling. So we're going to look at the functional aging training model and some of the evidence. We are going to go through a fair amount of research, but we're also going to look at sort of a broad overview of aging and enhance some of what Mark Middleton talked about this morning. So you all know my business partner, Cody Sipe. He's been in the industry a little bit longer than I have, well published, and has presented all around the world. This is me. In case you didn't know, I was the 2014 Personal Trainer of the Year from PFP Magazine, which I only highlight because it's not so much about me, but really about the fact that the industry finally started to take note of trainers training older adults and seniors. And so that was sort of a cool thing. We do have an international advisory board. We actually are adding more people to this. Danilo, FAI Europe. Ken Baldwin should be on here for FAI Australia. Jackie, FAI China. We have a lot of experts, master trainers, and people that are looking at the programs we put out. So it's not just stuff Cody and I have made up. So before we get too far into sort of training tactics, the research behind it, the science behind it, we have to give a little thought to longevity and how long we're going to live. And when we start to add numbers to it, we start to realize it's really a new phenomenon. In fact, I was doing some research on baby boomers and traditionalists, and interestingly enough, Social Security, I believe, was first passed into law in 1935, and life expectancy in 1935 was 58 or 59 years for men, and I think 60 or 61 for women. And so when you think about a massive national program that's going to help retirees with their bills and just not be in destitute poverty, and it's a program designed for a population that's not living even to the age when you start collecting it. And of course, now today, people are living well beyond that. Well, the interesting thing is the first Social Security check I don't think was even cut until the 40s, maybe 1942. I can't remember, but much later. And baby boomers born in the mid to late 40s had a life expectancy of still only around 65. And of course, we're seeing baby boomers way outlive their longevity. So it's an interesting stat when we realize you might be born at a time when life expectancy is 78, 79, and you might far exceed that. So how long do you think you're going to live? Just think about it for a second. It's not something we tend to think about. We don't walk around and go out to coffee and be like, how long do you think you're going to live? Now I want you to think about adding 10 or 20 years to that number. Right? All of us have some sort of a number. You can type it in the chat if you want. Then add 10 or 20 to it. All of a sudden it starts to strike you, right? Like I have always assumed I'll probably live somewhere between 90 and 95. There's a fair amount of longevity in my family. My grandmother just lived to 99 3/4. My other grandmother lived into her 90s. And many of the men have lived a long time too. So I sort of taken it for granted that I'll live into my 90s. And then if I add 20 years to that, all of a sudden I'm living to 110 into my 110s. It's sort of a little bit startling, like, okay, maybe I need to get a little more serious about this. When we see that average life expectancy at birth is going to cross 90 by the year 2030, we start to take notice of the fact that we're just going to live longer and longer and longer. So no country today has a life expectancy in their 90s at birth, but South Korea is expected to hit that by the year 2030. Life, that takes into all causes of death, right? Infant mortality, hit by a bus, accidental death, suicide, drug overdose, mistaken medication. There's so many different reasons that can impact overall life expectancy for a country. South Korea is expected to pass 90 for their women, which is really pretty remarkable. We're currently in the United States climbing a steep hill to over 80 million people in the USA over 65 years old. And again, if you look back at 1950, about 12 million people over the age of 65 in the country, right? I mean, it was just a very, very different thing. In fact, to be over 65 was to be really old. Well, now, if you call a 65-year-old really old, be prepared to get punched in the face, right? I mean, really old is much, much older than 65. In fact, look at the 85 and older population. It's really flatlined until about the year 2000 when it starts to climb. And we're going to see it explode when the baby boomers start turning 85. So we're only at the beginning of a massive aging phenomenon. And these numbers are actually steeper. So it's a much steeper climb. In Canada, United Kingdom, many European countries, their countries are getting older faster than the United States because their birth rates dropped off and their populations are much tilted towards the baby boom generation. So the reality is the 50 plus population is where the growth is going to be. In the United States, we've already passed the halfway point. So already more than 50% of our country is over the age of 50, and that's expected to grow substantially here in the future. So if we just look at the boomers, 1946 to 1964, approximately, there's still 72 to 73 million boomers with us today. Originally, there was somewhere between 76 and 78 million, depending on who you ask and what the birth date is. Most of them are still with us, and the anticipation is most of them will still be with us 10 years from now. And so, like Mark Middleton said, 10, 15 years ago, we were talking about how 10,000 people a day are turning 65, and then 10,000 people a day turning 60, and then 10,000 people 60. Now it's 10,000 people a day turning 70. And very soon, in 2021, it's going to be almost 10,000 people a day turning 75. So it really is the perfect storm. There's a huge need. We're going to see this explosion of aging really all around the developed world. So we need to have a comprehensive evidence-based training philosophy. So I'm going to jump through a couple of things here. Couple of my favorite clients. So Joanne was 80 years old when she came to us. She was not fit at all. She was absolutely unfit and unhealthy. She had Parkinson's disease. She could really barely walk a block, but she wanted to do something. What did she want to do? She wanted to go to the Galapagos Islands. In fact, I think she already believed that she would not be able to do this. This was going to be an experience that escaped her, that she just would not be able to do, or if she went, she might ruin it for her fit and healthy husband, Don, who's next to her. So I said to Joanne, I said, well, what do you need to do to actually enjoy the Galapagos Islands? Like, I've never been. Tell me what you have to be able to do. And she said, well, they tell me I have to be able to climb in and out of one of these rubberized Zodiac, small outboard boats. You can see it behind her there as they're hauling it to shore. I have to be able to climb in and out of one of those from the cruise ship. I have to be able to navigate a beach. And then I have to be able to walk about a mile on moderate to uneven terrain. It's not overly aggressive. It's not, super rocky, but it's also not paved sidewalks. So we talked about what she could do, right? We talked about her strength. We talked about her ability to only walk a block. And then we talked about her desire to do this. And this was such a huge desire. This was kind of that last bucket list item for her, that she trained with us for almost a year to get ready. And of course, you can see here, she did get to experience it and she had a great time. Absolutely fantastic. So then we have our adventure seekers, our average to almost fully fit clients who want to do something they know might take just a little bit more, right? So here's Dr. Summer at 58 years old, about to summit Mount Kilimanjaro with his daughter, and he knew he wasn't ready. He knew if he got there, he probably wouldn't be able to summit. He'd miss that experience with her. And so he trained really hard with us for 9 months to get in the best shape of his life so he could experience this, right? And no one can take this mountaintop experience away from him. He shared this with his daughter, and it was an absolute thrill of his lifetime. Example of another type of client, right? Grandparents. So Don, the teetering, tottering old grandfather, as he put it, he came to us at 88 years old, a little bit older than a lot of our average clients that start with us. But Don was an older grandfather, and he realized, I'm not going to get to see all my grandkids graduate high school if something doesn't change. Not only that, I don't know that I'm going to be able to keep traveling to see them because I am tottering. I'm having trouble in the airports. I get on the airplane and managing my luggage and just doing all the things that it takes to travel out to Seattle to see my grandkids is going to be a challenge. And I remember he wrote us a 2-page letter about 2 years later when his first grandkid graduated from high school. He wrote us this long letter. He said, you've changed my outlook on the future of my life. I've seen my first grandchild graduate, and I believe I can see them all graduate and maybe even see some of them get married someday. And you've changed my outlook for my 90s. But at 88, he realized he wasn't in a good place, right? He was really an incident, an accident, an injury from not even being able to travel to see his grandkids. And we completely changed that in probably about 6 months. But 2 years later, he was doing battle ropes and squats and lunges and you name it, we could throw it at him and he was up for the challenge. So he was no longer that teetering, tottering old grandfather, even though he was 90 years old. Couples, great opportunity here. The mature market, no doubt, needs fitness, right? There's all sorts of chronic conditions, all sorts of disease issues, joint issues, just a number of different things. They absolutely need fitness. They don't necessarily want fitness. Like Joanne, for example, she didn't want fitness. She wanted the Galapagos Islands. Dr. Summer, he didn't really want fitness. He wanted to summit Mount Kilimanjaro. Even Don, the teetering old grandfather, he just wanted more quality of life. He wanted more life expectancy, really. He's like, I don't want to just live 2 more years and barely survive. I want to live 5 to 10 more years and do it really well, healthy, strong, and vital, and be a part of my grandkids' lives. So they don't necessarily want fitness. They want what fitness can do for them and help them through life. So we know they have higher levels of health conditions. So how can we impact that? So I'm going to speed up here just a little bit because I want to get to some of the research and the science. But I love this funny math out of Canada. I'll let you guys read that. So 85% basically say, hey, look at that tiny little carrot or strawberry. I don't know what that is in the middle of the plate, right? They're not eating their fruits and vegetables. 62% are overweight or obese. I don't know if you're on Dr. Michael Rogers, but he showed some just fascinating statistics on obesity in our nation, especially the United States, and how it's impacting our longevity, our health, our chronic conditions. Nearly 1 in 5 admit to exercising less than once a week. 30% say they're often or always stressed. 80% think their doctor would say they're healthy. This is what I tell my kids. It's like 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 = 17. It's like, whoa, you scored a lot better than we thought. So we know they're not as healthy as maybe they even think, or even their doctors leading them to believe. We know they're not physically active. In fact, physical activity tends to decline almost every decade. People become less and less active. So we developed the hierarchy of functional aging. I want you to think about this image as we start to go through some of the research. What do we have to do to make sure we stay in the higher independent, semi-fit, or fully fit category? I don't think people have to be elite athletes. You don't have to, do crazy things. You don't even have to be an athlete at all. I think sometimes we make that mistake of pushing, like, oh, you got to compete at the National Senior Games, or you got to run a 5K, or you don't have to do those things. There are lots of other forms of physical activity, but you have to stay in the higher independent category or above. In fact, once you slip below that, you're an incident, an illness, an injury, an accident, a fall, a slip, a trip, a COVID diagnosis, a cancer, whatever it happens to be, can really take its toll on you. And all of a sudden you go from lower independent to pre-frail or frail, and bouncing back from that is really difficult for many folks. That's why we see of the 400,000 hip fractures a year, we see 100,000 of those people are dead within a year. They're gone within 12 months. And another 100,000 are left trapped in the frail or dependent category, never fully recovering to the life they had before. And so we want to have exercise programs that really minimize and mitigate that. So why do traditional exercise programs fail to maximize functional ability in older adults? This is a question for you. You have to answer it. So type in the chat or the Q&A, write it down on your board, but go ahead and enter it in the chat so we can all see it. That would be great. Eunice, you were 75 yesterday. Awesome. We're always looking for functional aging specialists and personal trainers over the age of 75, by the way. Recently, the Guinness Book of World Records released that the oldest personal trainer was 77, and I sort of chuckled. In fact, Cody's response was, that's not even old. So it's all relative, right, to your perspective. Some people were like, wow, a 77-year-old trainer. We've had 86-year-olds in our functional aging specialist workshops. So I sort of chuckled when I heard that 87 was the record. So Eunice, awesome. You taught your Zoom Zumba Gold class this morning. Carrie, because we don't address functional movements, we don't address everyday stuff. Yeah, I want you all to write this down, because if you do happen to run across research studies, everyday stuff or functional movements, typically the research literature calls task-specific training, and I love that they're starting to look at that. Nancy, they assume they are frail and unable, right? They don't relate it to their life. Let's see, what did Dina say? They picked the wrong program, they don't get pushed, right? There's no progression to it whatsoever. So we think the following information really needs to be considered and addressed, especially as, people are thinking about exercise programming for older adults. Now, older adults, I mean, you could go all the way down to 40 if you want, right? Usually the 40-year-olds get upset. But the reality is, as we begin to age, and for some of us that's in our 40s, for sure in our 50s and 60s, we just need to be giving some thought to the exercise programming and what it's impacting, right? So as we go back, here's 93 research studies. I'm not gonna read them all to you. Be glad you don't have to read them. But 2001, 31 research studies combined. They looked at strength, range of motion, aerobic capacity, body composition. primarily on older adults, but this is where it can get a little confusing. Some of these studies had people in their late 40s, early 50s, and maybe that was too young. They looked at functional measures like walking, so walking speed, maximal walking speed, chair rise, your ability to get out of a chair, balance scores, and then a bunch of disability measures, physical, social, emotional, and overall, right? There's a variety complex of disability scores. Encouragingly, on all the impairments, there was a very strong and consistent result, right? If you train someone for strength, they got stronger. Training somebody for range of motion, their range of motion got better. Aerobic capacity, it improves. Body composition, I always joke, grandma can get six-pack abs, right? Body comp will improve. We can improve these things. But then on the function measures, it was strong on some of them, but very inconsistent. And I think they hypothesized maybe the inconsistency was due to the wide variance of ages across these 31 studies, but they really didn't know. You can't make that assumption. The disappointing thing, disability scores were weak and inconclusive. Essentially, people got stronger, they got better range of motion, they got better aerobic capacity, better body composition. Didn't really show any conclusive impact on disability whatsoever. So that's pretty disappointing. Same researchers came back 3 years later. Now, you can see they had a hypothesis here, because what they did was they said, well, we're going to throw out all the range of motion studies. We're going to throw out all the aerobic capacity studies. We're going to throw out all the body comp studies, body comp. We're going to only look at strength training because we think that's the most important. So they looked at 62 trials of progressive resistance training in older adults. And these were now pretty much older adults, 60 plus, right? So sorry for those of you in your 60s, they're calling you older adults. But a little better cohort, right? We don't have any of these 40 and 50-year-olds running around messing up the numbers. Beautifully, they saw a large positive effect on muscular strength. People get stronger. Even people in their 90s and 100s get stronger. Large positive effect on muscular strength. However, if they got 50% stronger, they might have only got 10% more functional. So small to moderate effect on functional ability. In fact, they concluded strength gains do not equate to similar functional gains. That was pretty disappointing. And they actually concluded that there was no evidence of an effect for physical disability across 62 research studies. So we just went through 93 research studies. The overwhelming conclusion was pretty disappointing, though it did leave a lot of clues and a lot of things that helped Cody and I start to determine what actually should be done. 2011, in fact, this research study, I think they wanted to go so far as to say exercise might be useful, but it has no impact on function and disability. But they weren't really brave enough to do that. So they said exercise necessary, but not sufficient for improving function and preventing disability. In fact, I think some researchers at this point, about 10 years ago, were starting to think there's really not that much we can do through fitness, through strength training, through aerobic exercise, through all these different fitness parameters to really have an impact on disability. That's just inevitable with age. But we appreciated that one of their concluding statements was exercise may be necessary, but not sufficient. Effective interventions for minimizing disability are scarce and novel approaches are needed. And that's really what Cody and I had been working on with our dissertational research at Purdue, and then opening Miracles Fitness in 2007, and essentially training and experimenting on hundreds of clients over the last 13 years. We began developing a novel approach to impact balance and function and disability and all the things that the research was consistently missing on. And then you go back and you look at the research and you go, huh, so people got stronger, but they didn't get more functional. Let's look at what they did. So here's a graphical representation of our functional aging training model. We believe the person is standing here in the middle, right? Susan here is the physical function centerpiece. She wants to function better. She wants to do stuff better. She wants to move better, do whatever it is she wants to do in life, right? She has things she needs to do, things she likes to do, and things she wants to do. She might even have some things she dreams to do. So I don't want you to take away that strength training's bad. I hope you can see my cursor. Strength is over here in the musculoskeletal. It's important, but when we realize if we isolate that out, And then we really isolate out concentric strength. Most of what we find in the 62 research studies is concentric strength. Well, that's just not enough to then have a significant overall impact on physical function, right? They saw slight, small to moderate impacts on function, but it's just not enough. We have to be doing other things. And so Cody and I started to look at, well, what else do we have to do? Because of course we have to do strength and speed and power and muscular endurance and joint integrity. We have to do all this musculoskeletal work. And then some of the research looked at aerobic and cardiorespiratory work, and that improves aerobic capacity, but didn't really impact disability and function. Then we looked at some balance studies, and then we looked at some mobility, and we determined you have to be hitting all 6 domains of human function to have a dramatic impact on the disability and functional measures. So when we look at this trajectory of aging and we realize that the functional capacity is going to change over the life course. So we don't believe if you train all 6 of these domains to the absolute best, that at 96 years old, you're still going to be as functional and robust as you were at 36. We don't believe that. We do believe you're going to decline. The question is, how do we delay or prevent that slide towards disability? And can we keep you above the disability threshold for your entire life? Is that possible? And we believe it is. We believe you can die peacefully in your 90s or even early hundreds and not have crossed disability thresholds. That's really our ultimate goal for most of us, is we want to live our life on the blue line, get to the end of our days and not spend 3, 4, 5 years sick and declining and then passing away. My grandmother lived to 99 3/4. I think we all took it for granted she was going to make it to 105. In fact, I joke, I was disappointed she didn't make it to 100. Like, how dare she, right? Basically, she was kind of declining for like 2 weeks and then she died. In fact, once she lost the desire to take walks and kind of lost her desire to eat, she declined very quickly. But even like a week before the end of her life, she was still beating her grandchildren in cards and Rummikub and Scrabble and all the games she liked to play. So she really didn't decline that much till her final 10 days. So let's look at muscle power and aging. I've got some more research in here. We'll go through these fairly quickly. Power, of course, is strength and speed combined. So we'll look at power and strength. Watch my time because I don't have a moderator. So we know that muscle mass and strength declines. We know this is going to decline with age. One of the takeaways for people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s is you really have to be building muscle because it's going to decline with age. You're not going to be as strong at 70 as you were at 30, unless you happen to have been really weak at 30 and you got in great shape in your 50s. But relatively speaking, if you were fit in your 30s, you're not going to be as strong at 70. And then we start to see more dramatic losses after age 80. And so building muscle mass and a physiologic reserve is pretty critical. Let's look at the individual way up here at the top of the chart. I affectionately think of this guy as Howard. Howard came in to train with me. He was 94 years old and absolutely as strong as, he's the strongest 94-year-old I've ever seen. Strong as could be. He was stronger than most of our 60-year-old clients. Howard did not have a strength issue or a muscle mass issue. So he must have been right about here at the age of 60, like this individual. He probably declined. And at 90, he was still stronger than everybody else in the room. In fact, I repeatedly would tell him, Howard, you're stronger than just about all of our clients who are 20 and 30 years younger than you. And of course, Howard, to him, it was relative, right? Well, I'm not as strong as I was 10 years ago. I gave up golf when I was 88 because I couldn't beat the young guys anymore. Of course, the young guys were in their 60s and early 70s. He outlived almost all of his peers. At 94, he was a very successful ager. And this is almost 10 years ago now. So Howard would be 104 today. And Howard beautifully lived on the blue line. In fact, he left us like that. He didn't come in for a session one week. I called his wife, hey, where's Howard? He never misses. She's like, oh, he's not feeling well. 2 days later, he went to the hospital with pneumonia. He was gone by the next week. It was almost stunning. It was like Howard was in here telling all sorts of inappropriate jokes just last week, and now he's gone. So this just shows us sarcopenia is something we need to be thinking about. Muscle strength is going to decline. But when we look at how that impacts leg power, we see a much bigger drop off, right? So strength is declining, but power is really dropping off. That speed, that explosive, that quickness, ability to get out of a chair, run upstairs, do something quickly. So if we look at strength, say, let's just keep it simple at age 30. If strength is 10 and speed, velocity is 10, our power is 100. But if they both drop off a little bit, right? If strength drops to 7 and velocity drops to 7, look, our power has cut in half. And so we have to realize we have to be training both strength and speed, right? So my strength only dropped off 30%. My muscle mass dropped off 30%. I have enough strength to pick stuff up, but if my speed drops off that much as well, and this is often what happens, my power has dropped off tremendously. And of course, this has impacts for things like tennis and golf and, you know, all sorts of different functional tasks we have to do around the house, anything you have to do with any, you know, running around a playground with grandkids, anything you've got to do with any sort of velocity component or power component is going to be critical. Dynapenia, similar to sarcopenia, dynapenia is age-related loss of muscle power. And sarcopenia does not always equal dynapenia. Of course, it's going to impact it, right? If we lose muscle mass and we lose strength, well, that's 50% component of muscle power. When we look at a couple of different research studies, what we notice is age-related loss of muscle strength is often greater than loss of muscle mass. So it's not just the quantity or the size of the muscle, it's the strength and force production. Low strength is much more strongly associated with low physical performance or disability than low muscle mass. So this is why it's not just about building big muscles. We have to maintain the neurological health of those muscles. The muscles have to be firing. They don't have to be huge, right? Sometimes we think, oh, you've lost 10 pounds of muscle, so all your strength is gone. It's not just muscle mass. There's underlying mechanisms, especially neurological. This is why people can strength train, not get much bigger at all. They don't build great, big, huge muscles, but they get much stronger. The neurological adaptation and efficiency of muscle is significant. And often we can see that in 12 to 16 weeks with many individuals. So I'm going to run through several more studies here fairly quickly. Some of these go back quite a few years, right? Bassi in 1992, leg extensor power and functional performance in very old men and women. They linked leg power to functional performance tests, things like chair rise, stand, stair climbing, and 6-meter walk. So you can see a direct correlation between their leg extensor power and their functional performance on these various tests. So this kind of clued Cody and I into, hey, if we're just doing strength training with people, but expecting them to get better at chair rise, stair climbing, 6-meter walk, that might not be the right approach. Maybe we need to be looking at different measures, and of course, maybe we need to be training them in different ways. When we look at leg power versus leg strength, we realize power has a much more significant impact on just about every single measure. Stair climb time, chair stand time, tandem gait, you know, standing one foot in front of the other, just a stance. Power is more significant. Habitual gait, that's your normal speed, right? Maximal gait, that's your top speed. For some people, sadly, those are the same. They shouldn't be. There should be a difference, right? Short physical performance battery, that's a several item test. If you notice leg power, the relationship is more significant in all of these. Now, it's sort of common sense, right? I mean, we're basically looking at leg strength and velocity, right? We got strength and speed, so we would expect that power would make more sense. So we take that and we think back to 90 research studies looking at strength training. It's like, well, maybe if they'd been looking at power training and training people for power, they would have seen more performance impacts. So key takeaway here, this actually is looking at a wide range of ages, which I find pretty interesting. Middle-aged, 47, right? That's kind of rough. I'm 45, so I guess I'm middle-aged. Healthy osteoarthritis, 74. Mobility limited osteoarthritis, about 78. So this is the mean ages of their 3 different groups. They wanted to look at a middle-aged group, a healthy arthritis group, and a not so healthy, having some limitations. And basically what they saw was about 95% and 65% reduction in power respectively. Only about a 25 and 13% reduction in mass respectively. So not a huge loss of muscle mass compared to the loss of muscle power. Other studies are reporting deficits in neuromuscular activity during power testing, suggesting that the impairments are not just linked to a muscle mass, right? It's not just, oh, I've lost muscle because I'm 75. It's the neuromuscular component of contractile velocity as well as contractile strength, and that those things we're seeing greater deficits in the mobility limited group, but of course we're seeing the deficits across both age spans. I'm just going to hit the first point here. Muscle power is a more discriminate predictor of functional performance in older adults than muscle strength. So I don't want you to hear that strength training isn't important. It absolutely is. But we have to also think about training speed and have a speed component and have that consistently as well. We can't be doing everything we do slow. We've got to be thinking about some speed components. We might do strength and then we might do power, or we might do power primarily for our strength training as well, right? Even a chair stand activity. Well, it's a strength training activity, but we can do it primarily for power and get the strength component. When we look at the studies compared, again, consistently what we're finding is the power training groups are having greater impacts on ADL functional ability. When we look at 12 different studies here, 7 out of 12 use a non-active control group. I would have liked to have seen all 12 of them use a non-active control group, but 7 out of 12 used a non-active control group. Some studies, keep in mind, they don't like just telling people to do nothing for 12 weeks, so they might tell people to just keep doing what they normally do, or they might have the control group be a walking group, which is fine, but of course it's going to impact your results. 9 out of 12 had strength training and power training groups. They used pretty traditional resistance training exercises performed in an explosive way. 3 out of 12 of them used functional exercises. So this is from 2009, looking at a series of studies. So 12 of them. Wide variety of activities of daily living. This is always a challenge. How do you compare one study that looked at this gait measure and this one that looked at stair climbing and this one that looked at sit to stand? But what we saw pretty overwhelmingly was that the power training groups were showing much more significant improvements. 10 out of 12 of them showed significant improvements, whereas only 4 out of 9 of the strength training groups showed significant improvements. And wherever there was a comparison, the power training groups in most cases were significantly greater or equal to the strength training. In fact, time and time again, when you look at the research, the only thing that strength training is better for is pure strength. Balance scores, chair rise time, gait speed, power better, power better, power better. Strength alone, strength training is better, but power training still has a significant impact. Are changes in leg power responsible for clinically meaningful improvements in mobility? So a lot of researchers are looking at, does this actually matter? So sometimes we have to realize we can do all these things, and the 60 research studies that got people a lot stronger, the researchers in the end said, but who really cares if it doesn't impact function or disability? In the end, it's like, does it really matter that grandma can bench press 20 more pounds if it's not improving her life? So a lot of research studies, one of their goals is, how's this actually improving life, quality of life, functional ability, independence, reducing disability, because we know all of these things are significant. So the conclusion here was improvements in leg power, independent of strength, appear to make an important contribution towards clinically meaningful improvements in gait speed and the short performance battery tests. So people are actually moving faster, their gait speed's improving, and the short performance battery, both of which are predictive of mortality and disability among older adults. So they're using tests that we know have a predictive measure. We've seen if you score really poorly on habitual gait speed, right? If your habitual gait is less than, I don't know what the cutoff is, it's somewhere around 1.7, 1.8 miles per hour, you have a higher predictive mortality. And so this was pretty significant, and again, led us more and more at the Functional Aging Institute to say, hey, power's got to be a big component. We've got to be really telling people to be pushing power and making sure they're getting speed components. So when we look again, this is actually the same research group. Which impairments are most associated with high mobility performance in older adults? They're looking for a rehab prescription. That's kind of their goal in this research study. They want to look at how do we rehab, prehab, how do we say, hey, if we want to improve, or if we want to look at older adults that have the best mobility performance, what are some of the things that we can see, right? So if you notice at the very bottom here, both tertiles of leg velocity had a significant influence on functional performance, suggesting that improvements in leg velocity may have functional consequences for a broader range of individuals. So again, what they noticed was velocity, speed, the ability to move fast seems to have a significant consequence on functional outcomes and ability. And that's, of course, really what they're looking for, right? Like, what is it that separates these people that are moving better, have greater mobility? And it appears to be leg speed, leg velocity has a significant influence on it. Of course, there are other factors, right? I mean, there's always a myriad of factors, and you know, past health history and medications people are on, and so many things. But when we're trying to break out strength versus balance versus speed, velocity, and all these other things, velocity seems to be a significant influence. So let's talk about a few considerations for power training. You know, safety is always the biggest one that comes up, right? People are like, oh, I'm afraid I'm going to hurt people. How safe is it? They think of, you know, Olympic lifters doing power cleans and snatches and some higher risk activities. And that simply doesn't have to be the case. In fact, really, it appears from the research that the risk associated with power training primarily occurred during the testing, when we're really trying to push people, right? So power training programs with little or no testing likely have a low risk for injury. So if you're not one rep maxing somebody, if you're not pushing them to their absolute limits, the risks really appear to be pretty low. In fact, one research study says the risk is likely substantially higher in a jogging program than it is a power training program. So there's different ways to train power. We can look at 1, 2, and 8-second repetitions. There are different protocols for power in terms of, you know, whether we're training at a 20% of force production or a 40%. So I'm not gonna, this is not a power training presentation, but something for you to think about when you are training for power. Obviously, if we're doing an 8-second repetition, we're going to be training much more for strength, and in a lot of cases for isometric strength. When we get into the 1 and 2 second reps, we're training a lot more contractile velocity, a lot more speed. But there are different ways, right? We can even look at slow 8-second or slower contractions and how we would train for power. But you can see the curve here of force production obviously changes, right? With a 1 or 2 second rep, a lot of force at the beginning, and then of course it's going to taper down. Whereas an 8-second rep, we're going to have a more consistent force production. So typically the slower the rep, the more strength training we're getting, the faster the rep, the more speed or contractile velocity we have to get at the beginning of the repetition or the movement. So a lot of power training programs are going to look at 20 to 40% of your 1 rep max, your strength movement. Because if you're going to move fast, you have to have a resistance or a velocity that you can move fast, right? If I'm asking you to move your maximal, you're going to move that pretty slowly, right? So Equipment can be pneumatic equipment like Kaiser, can be resistance bands. Body weight works great. In fact, I think a lot of people, they get caught up in equipment on this, and you can do this very simply with resistance bands, medicine balls, and body weight alone. Concentric as fast as possible. Eccentric, typically going to be the slow and controlled portion, though there are times where we can train eccentric movements fast as well. We just want to be careful, especially if we're using pneumatic machines. Sets and reps, nothing fancy here. 2 to 3 sets, 8 to 12 reps. Frequency, about twice a week. You really don't need to train power much more than twice a week. 3 times a week would probably be the high end. Again, it depends on the quantity. If you're training power 5 to 10 minutes a session, you could probably do that 3 to 5 times a week. If you're really training power, like some training studios, like my friend Paul Holbrook at H Performance, they train power almost 80% of the whole session. So 2 to 3 times a week is plenty. Eunice, I'm just looking at the chat here briefly because I am getting close to wrapping up here. Eunice, has FAI created a non-machine course for online training of clients? We do have some non-machine courses. None of our courses, what I say right now, are specific to online training, in-person training, in-home training, studio training. So the concepts could be applied certainly to online training just as well as in-person training. Nick, did they ignore all the psychosocial factors? Some of the studies, yes. They're just looking at the physical, and so obviously that's a big missing piece, the socialization aspect, the psychology, the mindset, the mood, which is why we have a whole cognitive domain, because we think that piece is huge, right? If you believe you can get better, that's really, really significant. If you have a positive outlook, right? Like Joanne wanted to go to the Galapagos Islands, and her mindset about that was, if you think I can do this trip, if you believe I can do it, I will do all the other physical things you ask of me. Well, if she hadn't had that attitude, right, if her attitude was, I don't think I can do it no matter what you offer me, we probably wouldn't have been able to help her, right? So here's some exercise movements you can think of right now. I mean, you can take a screenshot of this. Again, I'll be providing the PDF. So frail to lower independent clients, right? We could do a power stand just from a chair. Just get up as fast as you can and then sit back down, and then get up as fast as you can. Step ups or a stair climb. I mean, just stepping up, just getting your body weight up, that takes a certain amount of contractile velocity. Of course, we want to see them start doing it quicker, right? Let's step up a little bit quicker. See if we have a set of stairs we can climb, let's try to climb them a little bit quicker. A get up and go, so we could do an 8 or a 10 or even a 12-foot get up, go to the cone, come back, let's time it. Chair drills, so we can do multiple chair drills. We can set up 2 or 3 different chairs, right? Go from this chair to that chair, get up, change positions, shift. I just want you to slide from that chair to this chair, right? We're mimicking all the different things we have to do, right? Getting in and out of a restaurant, getting in and out of your car, red light, green light game. So all simple tasks, really, none of this requires any sort of fancy exercise equipment at all. And then as we move to the more independent to average fitness level, that should say average fit. You know, this is someone who has either they're independent, you know, they're not having any troubles with activities of daily living, they're fairly healthy, to maybe even they're in the fit category, right? So we could be doing some power stands much more explosively, maybe adding a medicine ball to it, or maybe even adding jumping. We can be doing some line hopping drills, some short sprinting, some what time is it game, some jumping jacks. Now, if they've got joint issues and they can't jump, we can do, you know, up to your tiptoes, sort of faux jumps, right? Explode up, but don't come off the ground. So there's lots of different, again, none of these things really require any sort of special equipment. Then we get to the more athletic, the more fit, that higher level client. Of course, we can get into some plyometrics. I think I've got a box jump with an 80-year-old coming up here, medicine ball throws, medicine ball slams, power punching, power rows, more explosive movements, hang cleans if you want. I probably like hang cleans and these sorts of things with kettlebells as opposed to barbells, but you could certainly do them with barbells. Overhead push presses. I mean, there's a lot of powerful movements we can do, you know, with these clients. Now, we want you to be thinking about, I've covered a lot of material today, probably about 10 more minutes here, I'll take questions. Covered a lot of material today, but we want you to be thinking about specific strategies and techniques in these 6 different domains. Now, I spent most of my time talking about the difference between power and strength. I'm gonna hit a little bit of balance here and some mobility coming up. There's just no way in one session I can cover all 6 of these domains. In the functional aging specialist, in our 10-hour certification, we barely touch any one of these more than an hour. And we do believe, obviously, you have to keep gaining more knowledge in each of these areas and go deeper into some of them. And some of you will have to become experts in the cognitive piece if you have a lot of cognitive challenge clients, if you start seeing more people with cognitive impairment, dementia, Alzheimer's. Others of you, that might not be as important. Maybe the mobility and the balance piece is where you really need to be more of an expert. So we think you need to learn more in each of these 6 domains, and you need to figure out how to develop each of these areas. Just realize I can't possibly cover each one of these in depth. You probably need to spend 8 to 12 hours on each one of these. So here's some balance and mobility stuff. I take most of my balance and mobility stuff from the fall proof model. Cody and I were trained at Cal State Fullerton as fall proof instructors. I highly recommend the Fall Proof book by Dr. Deborah Rose. She was a mentor of mine. In fact, most of my dissertational research was based on the Fall Proof program. And this is really diving into balance and mobility. So diving deep into those categories, we start to look at some gait exercises, right? A whole bunch of different things we need to do to create an adaptable, flexible, efficient gait pattern. Too many of us, as we age, do the same thing over and over, right? We get out of bed, we walk to the bathroom, we walk downstairs. If we still have stairs in our home, we walk to the mailbox. We might go to the car, we go to the grocery store. We do the same traffic things. We do the same walking. We don't ever have to step over things, around things, do marching. So we have to do all these different movement patterns. Narrow walking, wide walking, on our heels, on our tiptoes, backwards, sideways, pretending like you're a dog peeing on a bush or a hydrant, walks with pauses and stops, all sorts of, and this is nowhere near a comprehensive list. Of course, obstacle negotiations, a sleeping dog, a sleeping cat, stepping over a parking block, stepping up stuff, stepping down stuff, swinging your leg through as you step up, stepping over something, up, down, around, over, all of the different stepping patterns you can think of. I like to think, let me go back here. People get overwhelmed with this sometimes. They're like, well, how on earth can I train all 6 domains of function? Well, one thing you can do is just train each one for 5 minutes every session. Now, that's probably not the best strategy, but you could train each one for 6 minutes, or you could train 3 of them for 10 minutes, or you might say, you know, my clients really need 20 minutes of this. They don't need as much cardiorespiratory. You know your clients, where your balance needs to be. So look, you can do 5 minutes of postural work for your musculoskeletal. You can do 6-minute balance stations. You can do a 6-minute gait and agility station, a 6-minute strength station. Now, some things overlap, right? Is it strength or is it balance? Not really sure which I'm training. Is it strength or is it neuromuscular? I might be hitting 2 domains at the same time, and then I might throw a cognitive challenge in, and all of a sudden we're doing a brain activity as well. I think I got the sound queued up on this. I cannot remember if this is a 24-inch box or a 30-inch box. It looks higher to me than 24 inches, but it's hard to tell because it looks higher than his knees. Either way, whether it's 24 or 30, very impressive. He's showing great power, nailing the landing, stepping down. Don't jump down with an 83-year-old, jump up, but he's doing great power. 5 repetitions there. I mean, we're getting some maximal power effort out of him. You know, really good work. And obviously, some of your clients aren't going to be able to do that high of a box, but you could start with a 12-inch or 18-inch box. All right, let me see where I'm at slide-wise and time-wise here. Oh, yep, we're good. We are almost done, and then I will do questions because we're gonna stop here at the positive aging paradigm. So go ahead and start typing your questions in, and we'll start tackling those here in just a minute. So if we think back to the Nagy model, which originally did not have lifestyle and inactivity, Rickley and Jones revised it in '97. And they said, this is a model that leads to disability. And of course, we as fitness professionals, physical therapists, allied health people want to somehow disrupt this pattern. We don't want to get to disability. In fact, we don't really even want to get to functional limitation. So we have to train as many impairment level factors as we can to really mitigate and limit functional limitations. If we don't have any functional limitations, we typically have very few disabilities. So our overarching principles for when we think about training clients that can be foundational for you are 4 cornerstones, 2 pillars, and 7 principles. This is the foundation of the functional aging specialist and group exercise specialist, an in-depth understanding of the aging process and its implications for exercise. So we're not saying people are going to live to 100, and if they do it well, they're going to be just like they were 25. That's not the case. There's certainly aging processes. We're all getting older, and we have to understand that and its implications for exercise. A recognition of the desires, goals, and aspirations that accompany the third age. The reason why we love having Mark Middleton speak so much is that he hits number 2 and number 3 so well, right? A strong belief that people can be fit, healthy, vibrant, and functional at any age. That doesn't mean I'm saying it's not going to be tough. That doesn't mean you're going to be cancer-free or not get hit by a car. I mean, he showed those 2 men in their 90s, right? The one guy had had a major stroke. The other guy had been hit by a car while riding his bicycle. But a strong belief that you can still be fit, healthy, vibrant, and functional in any age. You can bounce back from those things, get over those things, and approach to exercise that's grounded in evidence and honed with experience. What I tried to do today was ground you with a bunch of evidence. Now, I can't hone you with the experience. You have to go do that one client at a time. I have people ask me all the time, well, when am I ready to start? Like, well, if you feel like you have enough ideas, enough concepts, enough evidence, you have to start with client number 1. I can't get you to client number 50. You got to start with client number 1. So start practicing, be safe with people, be smart, and take the tips we've given you. 2 pillars, this really isn't that complex: specificity and progressive overload. Specific adaptation to increase demand. How you train is how you gain, right? So when we start training for putting something on a shelf, getting out of a chair, task-specific training, guess what? You get better at that task. So strength training isn't the bad guy here. What we actually find is if you put somebody on a leg press, they get stronger on a leg press. They put somebody on a chest press, they get stronger on a chest press. Doesn't necessarily correlate to all the functional things they have to do. Progressive overload, this is where we get scared, right? We're like, well, yeah, but wait a minute. Dr. Dan, you don't mean progressively overloading an 85-year-old. Well, I do if you want them to get better, right? Now, progressive overload might be teeny tiny little baby steps for them, but we have to overload them for them to get better. They're not going to improve without it. 7 principles. We have to be prioritizing training all components of function. This is where we look at that chart of 6 domains and we go, wow, there's a lot of components of function. Now, you don't have to do all components every session, but you want to be hitting all components over the course of a week or 2-week cycle. Be purposeful for every aspect of training. Like, why are you doing this exercise with Joyce at the 15th minute of your session? It's not because Bob liked it yesterday. It has to be purposeful for Joyce. Integrate movement patterns, train in all 3 planes. The research gave us great clues. If you train people in the sagittal plane and the sagittal plane only, they get stronger in the sagittal plane, and it doesn't translate very well to transverse movement patterns. It doesn't translate well to the 3-dimensional living that we do as human beings. Include isolation type exercises supplementary and complementary. We don't throw them out. Don't make that mistake. We use them as supplementary and complementary. Number 5, I think probably is the most important. If you take nothing else away from what I taught you today, train people standing or on the floor as much as possible, only seated when it serves a specific purpose. Most of the research we notice, they put people on seated machines, seated activities, isolated seated movements, and then we don't get a good, then we get the person up and ask them to do something on their feet, and we haven't trained them for that. So be smart. Number 6 is common sense. I think like energy level is critical. And then number 7 is client safety. I said this earlier, the mature market has huge physical needs, right? The mature market needs fitness desperately. Chronic conditions, arthritis, high blood pressure, obesity, diabetes, Parkinson's, you name it. We could come up with such a long list of why they need fitness. We start to get discouraged about what aging looks like. But the mature market wants what fitness can give them. They don't necessarily want fitness. In fact, again, Dr. Rogers was awesome. He said, actually, the term exercise has a negative connotation for most people over 60. So we got to be careful even using the word exercise and fitness. But they do want these things, right? They want to be productive. They want to have energy. They want to have life experiences. They want to go on adventures. They want to have quality of life. So how do we position ourselves that we have the program that enables all of this, right? They don't necessarily want to buy a fitness program. They want to buy a quality of life program. They want to buy a better future. They want, need to do, like to do, want to do, even dream to do. And so how is your exercise program doing that? So I'm going to close with, I'm not going to go over all the money stuff with you. This slide right here. So again, 6 domains of human function. One of the things we're doing at the Functional Aging Institute, I don't know if you've noticed, but we're releasing more and more courses in each of these domains, right? Like last year we released the brain health trainer in the cognitive piece. Recently this year we partnered with Zibrio and we promote their balance course. And we just launched our own Balance Matters in September with Erica DeMarch. She's speaking later today. You don't want to miss her. Really smart physical therapist on neurological issues. She's probably going to develop a neuromuscular course for us as well. We've been releasing some mobility and neuromuscular courses from Emily Splickle at Evidence-Based Fitness Academy. Age Well Collective tries to hit all of these 6 domains in their mentorship program. So we're trying to release more and more courses. Paul Holbrook, Rapid Movement Training. It's a speed and power course and almost no equipment. Goes over how he trains clients for speed and power. So we're trying to develop more courses for each of these areas. So I'm going to close with this. We have to realize that being over 65 is nowhere near as bad as young people believe it is. And I'm looking forward to getting some updated statistics on this. This is from about 4 years ago, I believe. 18 to 64-year-olds just overwhelmingly think negatively about what it must be like to be 65, right? We think that 57% of people over 65 are dealing with memory loss, when only 25% actually are experiencing that. Not able to drive. Some of these next 4 sort of crack me up. Not able to drive. We think 45%. I say we because I'm in the 18 to 64. So if you're in the over 65, you get to see what people younger think about you. Not able to drive. We think 45% of people over 65 are not able to drive. This is not, you know, can you drive well? This is like you've had your driver's license taken away. You're no longer allowed to drive. But then 2 down, we're like not sexually active. We say 34%. I'm like, wait a minute. We said they're not even allowed to have a driver's license. A serious illness, we think almost half of people over 65 have a serious illness. It's only 21%. That almost doesn't even make sense with the next one, because we say, well, 42% are seriously ill, but 34% are not sexually active, which I was like, really? You would think it would at least match the serious illness, 42%. 21% actually report they're not sexually active, which of course means 79% still are sexually active. So typically, overwhelmingly, we just view to be over 65 in a much more negative light than the reality actually is. We have to be a positive aging paradigm. Both of these are from Mark Middleton. I loved what he had to say, right? Aging is an opportunity. It's not a disease. It's not, it actually is pretty contagious. More and more people are living older, but it's not a disease. It's not an illness. It can be thoroughly healthy. Banana George Blair said it best. I don't wait for the next thing to happen. I make it happen. All right, what questions do you have? I do want to respect our 3 o'clock speakers, so I'll take questions here for about 10, 15 minutes, as long as you guys want to chat. So type it in either the chat or the Q&A down at the bottom of your screen there. Dina, thoughts on loading early regarding Dustin's load as soon as possible. When would you recommend we start loading someone? Boy, that's a pretty complex question, Dina, because it is so case by case, you know, on the individual, and you know, if Dustin's talking about if they're coming off of a rehab injury. But typically, I mean, I agree with him. We do want to load people pretty quickly, and even people coming off a hip replacement, knee replacement. I mean, now you look at what we did 20 years ago versus what we're doing now, right? Now we're getting people up on their feet as fast as we can. We're putting body weight on a joint replacement as quick as we can. We're loading that up. And so it's like, wait, they just had major knee surgery and we're loading them. And so of course, if we have just a deconditioned new client, we can start loading them pretty quickly as well. I hope that answers your question. If you're talking specifically about loading someone for power training, then that might be a slightly different question. But, and again, we have to be smart about it. So when I think of the principle of progressive overload, and I'm talking about, you know, progressively loading more and more with that client, I'm still talking about small progressions. I'm not saying we're going from, you know, a 5-pound weight to a 15-pound weight. I mean, we're progressing slowly, but we are loading people and overloading people consistently. Carrie Hollywood, thank you so much, Dr. Dan. I hope you're able to give us your PowerPoint slides for the great stats and let us know more of the FAI courses being released. Absolutely, Carrie. We're going to be posting the PDF up on the site. So a lot of the speakers, we already have their PDFs. Some we're still waiting on. So you can come back to the site and download the PDF there. Thanks for being here, Eunice. Awesome being with you. Pamela, this was awesome. Thank you. Looking forward to the FAI specialist training. Awesome, Pamela. That's great. Glad that you're in it. Munaza, Pakistan or Pakistan. Hey, I have to share this with you, Munaza. You know, one of my heroes of aging is my grandmother. You know, I mentioned her, you know, 99 3/4 she lived to. She passed away almost a year ago now. It was last October. You know, when she was 80 years old, she decided to go to Pakistan to teach English as a second language to Afghan refugee women. She actually, my grandfather built a hospital in Afghanistan in the 70s, I want to say. And she'd always sort of had a heart for Afghan women and Pakistan women as well. And this must have been around 99 or 2000. She said, hey, I'm going to go to Pakistan and teach English as a second language. Not kind of your typical thing to do in your 80s, but I use it as a great example of, man, I have no idea what kind of crazy opportunities or adventures or excursions or missions or volunteer work or new companies that might come my way in my 70s or 80s, right? I mean, Nelson Mandela becomes president at the age of 75. I'm sure at 65, he thought he was never getting out of jail. So Dina, thanks for being on. Let me check the Q&A here too. You guys have 2 places you can. All right, I'm not seeing any other pressing questions. I know you guys are probably Zoom fatigued like I am. So take a break, take a walk, get some exercise in. We've got 3 more sessions at 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific, 3 great ones to choose from. I will be hosting one of those, so maybe I'll see some of you again later. And then 3 more at 4:30 Eastern, 1:30 Pacific. So see you, everyone. Thanks for being here.